"Sir, could you pretend to be my husband just for one day?" said the fat, 18-year-old to Amish man. The church bells of Lancaster County tolled at dusk, echoing through the valley like a sentence passed down from heaven itself. Inside the crowded barn where the auction was held, Miriam Zook stood trembling, her bonnet slipping from her hair as the voices of men thundered around her. Her father, stern-faced and cold, slammed a folded contract onto the table. 50 acres, he barked, to the highest bidder, and my daughter comes with it. She's stout, obedient, and God knows no one else would take her. The crowd of men erupted in laughter. "She's as wide as the barn door," one jeered. "She'll eat more than the land's worth," another mocked. Miriam's cheeks burned crimson as the cruelty poured over her. She wanted to vanish into the floor, to disappear into the earth. Yet her father's hand pressed firmly against her back, pushing her forward like livestock. And then the saloon-keeper, Jonas Pike, a man known even among the Amish for his greed, stepped up, his eyes glinting. "I'll take her," he said with a smirk, "a wife to bind the land, a woman to warm the bed. Her father's debts cleared just like that." The barn roared with approval. Men stomped their boots. Women whispered behind their shawls. Miriam's breath caught, despair clawing at her chest. She stumbled backward, clutching her Bible as though it could shield her from shame. Her eyes darted wildly across the room, searching for a crack of mercy, a shred of hope. And that's when she saw him. At the far end of the barn, half in shadow, stood a man taller than the rest. Broad shoulders, beard rough from the mountain winds, eyes dark and steady. He was no bidder, no gambler. He was an outsider. With trembling lips, Miriam whispered as she moved toward him, "Sir, could you pretend to be my husband just for one day?" The man's gaze locked with hers. Something shifted in his face, softness, resolve, a glimmer of steel. And in that instant, everything changed. The barn smelled of sweat, hay, and kerosene lantern smoke. The benches creaked beneath the weight of men, eager for spectacle. Miriam's heart pounded in her ears, her hands twisting in the folds of her plain gray dress. Her father, Eli Zook, stood tall beside her. His face was hard as stone, lips drawn thin, eyes cold as slate. Once, when she was a child, those eyes had held warmth, even pride. But tonight there was nothing of a father in him, only a merchant selling off a burden. "She's strong enough to plow a field," Eli declared, his voice carrying over the crowd. "She'll bear many sons, and the land 50 acres of rich soil comes tied to her hand, a fair trade for any man." The men laughed, the sound cruel and sharp. "Bear sons? She looks more fit to bear wagons," someone shouted. "Best build a bigger bed if you take her," another added. Laughter exploded, rattling the rafters. Miriam felt her stomach twist, bile rising in her throat. She lowered her eyes to the dirt floor, but the shame still burned hot across her skin. Her father pressed a hand to her back, forcing her forward. "Stand tall, girl," he hissed under his breath. "At least try to look worth the price." Tears pricked Miriam's eyes, but she blinked them back. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her cry. That's when Jonas Pike stepped forward, hat in hand, his smile oily. He was no Amish man. He ran a saloon at the edge of town, a place of whiskey, gambling, and women. "I'll take her," he drawled, "and the land with her. A woman like that needs a strong hand to tame her." The barn erupted again, cheers, whistles, mocking applause. Miriam's knees weakened. Her chest heaved with silent sobs she dared not release. She stumbled back, clutching her Bible to her chest. Her lips moved soundlessly at first, a prayer, a plea. Then she whispered words she had never imagined herself saying aloud. "Sir, could you pretend to be my husband just for one day?" The words carried farther than she intended. A hush fell over the crowd as heads turned. At the far end of the barn, Kenneth Boone stepped out of the shadows. He was not one of them. Taller, broader, with a beard touched by mountain winds and eyes like iron under storm clouds. A man who lived apart, who worked his own land with calloused hands and asked nothing from the world. He moved forward slowly, each step echoing in the silence. When he stopped beside Miriam, the difference in their stature was stark. She, small and trembling, he, solid as the oaks on the ridge. "She's with me," Kenneth said, his voice low but carrying like thunder, "and she's not for sale." Jonas Pike's smirk faltered. "You can't just claim her," he spat. "The land is bound to her hand." Kenneth's gaze didn't waver. "Then I'll bind my hand to hers." He took Miriam's hand gently in his, lifting it for all to see. "She is under my protection now." A murmur rippled through the crowd, shock, disbelief, even envy. Eli Zuck's jaw tightened, his face flushing red. But he said nothing. He had his coin. Kenneth turned to Miriam, his grip steady, his voice meant only for her. "You'll come with me now? No one here will touch you again." For the first time that night, Miriam felt her lungs fill with air. She wasn't sure what this man intended or what tomorrow would bring. But tonight, for the first time in her life, she wasn't alone. The barn doors slammed shut behind them, muting the laughter that still rang in Miriam's ears. The night air was cool, damp with the smell of pine and soil. Lantern light from the barn spilled onto the yard, but beyond that, glow stretched only darkness and the faint outline of Kenneth's wagon. He guided her with a steady hand at her back, not rough, not hurried, simply steady. Miriam's breath hitched with every step, afraid someone would shout after them, demand she return. But no one did. For the first time in hours, silence wrapped around her. Kenneth lifted her onto the wagon bench before climbing up himself. The wooden wheels creaked as the horse started forward, hooves striking sparks on the stones of the road. Miriam kept her eyes on her hands clasped tight in her lap. "You're safe now," Kenneth said at last, his voice deep and even. Safe. The word struck her like a blow. She had prayed for it her whole life, whispered it in the dark when loneliness pressed down, but never believed she would feel it. "Why?" she asked quietly, her throat raw. "Why would you help me?" Kenneth kept his gaze on the road, the shadows of trees flickering across his face. "Because no woman deserves to be bartered like cattle, and because—" He paused as though weighing each word. "Because you asked me." Her heart twisted. That simple. She had whispered a plea, and he had answered. The wagon jolted as they left the main road, climbing into the hills. The night deepened, stars pricking the sky, the moon casting a pale silver glow. Miriam shivered, pulling her shawl tighter. Without a word, Kenneth shrugged off his heavy coat and draped it across her shoulders. The wool was rough but warm, smelling faintly of smoke and pine sap. "You'll need it more than I do," he said when she glanced up in surprise. Tears stung her eyes. No man had ever given up comfort for her, not her father, not any suitor. She bowed her head, letting the warmth soak into her bones. Hours passed in near silence, broken only by the horse's breathing and the creak of the wagon. Miriam's exhaustion pressed heavy, her eyelids fluttering. She fought sleep, afraid of dreaming of the jeers and taunts she'd left behind. "Rest," Kenneth murmured. "We've still a way to go. I'll see you safe." Something in his tone, the quiet certainty, eased her fear. Her head tilted against his shoulder before she could stop it. His body was solid, unmoving, a wall against the night. She let her eyes close. Dawn broke as the wagon crested a ridge. Miriam blinked awake, the horizon painted in rose and gold. Below lay a valley, untouched and quiet. A stream wound through it like silver thread, pines crowding its edges. Nestled at the base of the hill stood a cabin, rough-hewn, smoke rising faintly from its chimney. Kenneth reined in the horse, his eyes scanning the land with quiet pride. "This is home." Home. The word felt foreign on her tongue, but in that moment, gazing at the lonely cabin and the strong man beside her, Miriam felt the first fragile thread of belonging stir in her heart. When they reached the cabin, Kenneth helped her down, his hand gentle but firm around hers. The earth smelled of dew and pine needles, the sound of the stream steady in the distance. "You'll be safe here," he said again, opening the door. Inside was simple but clean, rough wooden walls, a stone hearth, shelves lined with jars, a table, and 2 chairs. It wasn't grand, but it was warm, lived in, built by hands that valued labor over show. Miriam stood in the doorway, clutching the coat around her. Her voice trembled when she spoke. "I don't know what tomorrow will bring, but tonight, thank you." Kenneth met her gaze, his own steady and sure. "Tomorrow can wait. Tonight, you rest." And for the first time in her life, Miriam stepped into a place where she wasn't a bargain or a burden, but simply a woman given the gift of safety. Miriam awoke to the smell of wood smoke and the faint crackle of a fire. For a moment she thought she was back in her father's house, but the low ceiling beams, the sturdy log walls, and the single quilt covering her reminded her this was not Lancaster, and she was no longer a daughter to be bartered. She was in Kenneth Boone's cabin. The door creaked, and she startled. Kenneth stepped in, his boots dusted with frost, a pail of water swinging easily from one arm. He set it down by the stove without a word. "Morning," he said, voice low but not unkind. "Morning," she whispered, her hands clutching the quilt. "I brought water. There's bread and beans on the table." He paused, scratching at his beard. "Eat as much as you like." She nodded, her throat too tight for thanks. The first days passed in an uncertain rhythm. Kenneth worked outside, splitting logs or tending the small corral where 2 horses stamped their hooves against the cold. Miriam moved through the cabin slowly, unsure what was hers to touch, yet needing to do something to quiet her restless hands. She swept the floor, dust rising in shafts of light. She mended a fraying curtain with the small sewing kit Kenneth found in a trunk. She even scrubbed the iron pot until it shone. Each act of care steadied her heart, made the cabin feel less like a stranger's shelter and more like a place she might belong. At supper, Kenneth always let her take food first. The meals were simple stew, cornbread, roasted rabbit, but somehow they felt like feasts. And though Kenneth said little, Miriam began to notice small things. The way he always placed her chair closer to the fire, how he checked the shutters twice before they slept, how he muttered a prayer over the food even when he thought she wasn't listening. One evening, as the wind howled outside, Kenneth carried in a bundle of wood and set it by the hearth. Miriam, darning a pair of socks, looked up shyly. "You work hard," she said softly. He shrugged. Cabin won't keep itself standing. You let me stay. You've done more than you had to. Kenneth studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. You're not a burden, Miriam. You're company. Her cheeks warmed. Company. Such a simple word, but for her it meant more than any flattery she'd ever heard. The days grew colder, snow whispering across the hills. Kenneth showed Miriam how to chop wood, steadying her hands on the axe handle until the rhythm came naturally. Her first attempt was clumsy, but when the log split clean, Kenneth gave a rare smile. See? Stronger than you think. Her chest swelled with quiet pride. Later, she showed him how to mend a torn sleeve with neat stitches. He sat stiffly at first, the needle awkward in his large hands, but she guided him patiently. When at last the seam held, his rough laugh filled the cabin. Never thought I'd sew a thing in my life, he said. You never thought you'd have a wife either, Miriam answered before she could stop herself. The words hung between them, startling in their boldness. Her face flamed, but Kenneth only grew quiet, his eyes searching hers, then turned back to the fire. One night, Miriam found an old Bible tucked in a drawer, its cover worn, pages filled with notes and faded ink. Inside, folded between psalms, was a deed 50 acres surrounding the cabin, including rights to the stream. Her breath caught. This was her father's hand, his seal pressed into the paper. When she showed Kenneth, his jaw tightened. This land is yours, then, by law. Her heart pounded. Mine? He nodded. Your father thought he'd sold you, but what he really sold was a future he didn't deserve to touch. That deed makes you mistress of this valley. Miriam's fingers trembled over the parchment. For the first time, her life was bound not by shame, but by inheritance, by belonging. Kenneth rested his calloused hand gently over hers. And no one's going to take it from you, not while I'm here. His words, quiet but fierce, sank into her bones. She lifted her eyes and for the first time dared to believe them. Outside, the snow fell heavier. Inside, the cabin glowed with firelight. Two lives, once broken and wandering, were beginning slowly, carefully to stitch themselves together like patches on a quilt. And though neither dared name it yet, love was already blooming in the silence between them. The cabin's peace lasted only a few weeks before the first shadow appeared on the ridge. 3 men on horseback, faces rough, eyes mean, watched from a distance as Kenneth split logs in the yard. Miriam, kneeling by the chickens, froze when she saw them. The riders didn't speak, didn't move closer, just sat there saddled like vultures, studying the cabin. Then, as if satisfied, they turned and rode back toward town. That night, as the fire snapped in the hearth, Miriam asked, "Who were they?" Kenneth's jaw tightened. "Jonas Pike's men, and likely working with the railroad, too. They've heard about your deed." Miriam's stomach turned cold. "The land, but it's only a valley. Why would they want it so badly?" Kenneth leaned forward, his eyes shadowed. "The stream. It feeds half the ridge. The railroad wants water for their line. Pike wants coin. And they'll both do whatever it takes to get it." The days that followed grew tense. Word reached them through the pastor that town gossips claimed Miriam wasn't Kenneth's wife at all, only his housemaid, living in sin. Women who once shared hymns with Miriam now whispered behind their bonnets. Some said she had bewitched him, others that he had bought her outright. Each rumor was another stone on Miriam's chest. "I've ruined you," she whispered one evening as they cleared the table. Kenneth looked up sharply. Ruined me? Miriam, you've given this place life. Don't you see it? Her eyes filled with tears. They say I don't belong, that I've shamed you. Kenneth stepped closer, his voice steady, his presence filling the room. I don't care what they say. You're here, with me. That's all that matters. But later that night, when he thought she was asleep, she heard him pacing by the fire. His voice was low, a mutter. Too dangerous. I can't keep her here, not with Pike circling. The words cut deeper than any jeer in town. 2 mornings later, the danger sharpened. Kenneth returned from the barn with a paper in his hand, his face dark. They've forged documents, he growled, slamming it on the table. The deed looked like hers, but Pike's name sprawled across the lines. They mean to claim this valley as theirs. If the sheriff sides with them, Miriam clutched her shawl, her breath shallow, and if you stand with me, they'll come after you too. Kenneth met her gaze, fierce. Let them. I won't let them take what's yours. But his promise warred with the muttered words she'd overheard, too dangerous. Can't keep her here. That night, while Kenneth rode the perimeter with his rifle, Miriam sat at the table, her mother's Bible open before her. The deed lay folded inside, its parchment heavy as iron. She traced the ink with trembling fingers. If she stayed, Pike would bring more men. The railroad would press harder, and Kenneth, honorable, steadfast Kenneth, would fight until blood was spilled because of her. She bowed her head, tears dripping onto the pages. Then, with shaking hands, she wrote a note. Kenneth, you gave me more kindness than I ever dreamed, but I cannot let you suffer for me. The deed is here, safe inside the Bible. Use it to keep your land. Forget me, and you'll be free of danger. Miriam. She pressed the note flat, tucked the deed carefully between psalms, and left both on the table. Before dawn, she wrapped her shawl around her shoulders, took a small bundle of bread, and slipped out into the snow. The cold bit at her cheeks as she walked toward the mountains, her breath clouding in the dark. Each step away from the cabin felt like a knife, but she forced herself forward. Better the wilderness than watching Kenneth pay for her father's sins. When Kenneth returned at sunrise, the cabin was too quiet, the fire dead, the bed empty. His eyes fell on the Bible, the folded note. He read it once, twice, his hand trembling around the paper. Damn it, Miriam, he muttered, his voice raw. His gaze dropped to the deed, left behind like a gift. She had given him the key to survival and taken herself into danger. Kenneth's fist closed around the note. His chest heaved with a rage and a fear he hadn't felt in years. For so long he had lived alone, convinced solitude was safety. But in Miriam's absence, he realized the truth. Without her, the cabin was nothing but wood and stone. He saddled his horse with urgency, rifle slung across his back. Snow still fell, light and cold, but he pressed into the wind. He would find her. He would fight Pike's men if he had to. And this time, he would not let her believe she was anything less than the heart of his home. The snow deepened as Miriam trudged higher into the mountain pass. Her breath came in ragged clouds, her boots slipping on ice-slick stones. She clutched her shawl tighter, praying she could find shelter before nightfall. Behind her, the crunch of hooves broke the silence. She froze. Turning, she saw them, Jonas Pike's men, 3 riders weaving through the trees, their torches casting cruel shadows. There she is, one sneered, the fat girl with the deed. Let's bring her back to Pike. Miriam's chest clenched. She wanted to run, but her legs were heavy with cold and fear. She stumbled backward, heart pounding, and then thunder on hooves. Kenneth. He burst through the trees astride his stallion, rifle raised, his voice booming like storm over the valley. "Leave her be!" The riders cursed, wheeling their horses to face him. Kenneth dismounted in one powerful swing, boots crunching into the snow. He leveled his rifle, his eyes like steel. "She's under my protection," he growled. "You want her, you'll have to go through me." Steel flashed knives and pistols glinting in the torchlight. The air crackled with danger. The first man lunged, and Kenneth swung his rifle like a club, cracking it across the attacker's jaw. Another fired a shot. The bullet tore into a tree behind them. Kenneth charged, his fist landing hard, sending the man sprawling. But one rider circled wide, dismounting with a knife in hand, creeping toward Miriam. Fear surged in her throat. For a heartbeat, she froze. Then she remembered Kenneth's words, "You're stronger than you think." Snatching up a heavy branch from the ground, she swung with all her strength. The blow struck the man's arm, sending the knife spinning into the snow. He howled, staggering back. Kenneth spun at the sound, eyes blazing when he saw her standing tall, branch still raised. For an instant, pride flickered across his face. "Good girl," he rasped, before turning to drive the last attacker back into the trees. The fight ended in gasps and curses, Pike's men retreating down the slope, dragging their wounded with them. Their torches dwindled into the distance, leaving only the hush of falling snow. Kenneth dropped his rifle into the drifts and strode to Miriam. His hands, rough and trembling, cupped her face. "Don't you ever leave me like that again," he said hoarsely. Then softer, breaking, "Don't you ever believe you're a burden. Miriam, you're my choice, my partner, my future." Her tears froze on her lashes, but her heart burned with a new, fierce certainty. "I thought I'd ruin you," she whispered, "but you make me believe I'm worth saving." He pressed his forehead to hers, his breath warm in the cold. "You are worth everything." And in that frozen clearing, with the world falling silent around them, Miriam discovered her strength not in running, but in standing beside the man who had chosen her wholly, without shame. By the time Kenneth and Miriam returned to the cabin, night had fallen. The fire in the hearth was nothing but cold ash, the room dark and silent. Miriam shivered as she stepped inside, but Kenneth knelt at once, striking flint, coaxing the flames back to life. Soon the cabin glowed again, warmth driving away the chill, shadows retreating into the corners. Miriam sank into the chair nearest the fire, exhaustion pulling at every muscle. Her shawl was damp, her hands raw from clutching the branch, but her eyes were alive in a way they had never been before. Kenneth brought her a blanket and knelt beside her. "You're safe here," he said simply, his voice steady as stone. "As long as you'll have it, this is your home." Her breath caught. The words were more than comfort, they were a vow. Tears blurred her vision as she whispered, "Home." She reached for his hand, rough and scarred from years of work, and held it tightly. For a long time they sat in silence, the fire crackling between them. Outside, the wind rattled the shutters, a reminder that the world still waited with its judgments, its greed, its cruel laughter. Pike would try again. The railroad would not relent, and the town's gossip would never fully fade. But here, in this circle of light, none of that mattered. They had fought, they had endured, and they had chosen each other. Miriam laid her head against Kenneth's shoulder, the steady beat of his heart answering every doubt she had ever carried. And yet, as the flames danced, one question lingered in the quiet. Could their love, fierce as it was, truly withstand the world beyond these cabin walls? Every time I share a story like this, I'm reminded how love can bloom in the most unlikely places between fear and courage, shame and hope. Miriam and Kenneth's journey shows us that sometimes all it takes is one person to see our worth when the world refuses to. Now I want to hear from you. Where are you listening from tonight? Do you still believe in love that defies judgment? If you do, stay with us. The next story is waiting, and it just might be the one your heart has been searching for.